So today we are here at the last session of oculoplastic today, which is on ocular oncology. And we have with us Dr. Vikas Menon sir, Dr. Nandan Chette sir, and Dr. Mahesh Shanmuganan sir. Very warm welcome to everyone. So, sir, with your permission, we will start the session soon, and Dr. Santosh Unava sir will be joining us soon. So, we will start with the first talk of the session, Dr. Nandan Chette sir. Dr. Nandan Chette sir is quite a well-renowned name in the state of Maharashtra. He works at the Tata Hospital, and he is somebody who is treating high-volume retinoblastoma cases there. He will be talking on targeted chemotherapy, improving outcomes in intraocular retinoblastoma. Over to you, Nandan, sir.
Thank you, Sumit, for the kind introduction. I'll be sharing my screen. So,
Jayanta Das, sir, there is some voice from your side. You need to,
Okay.
yeah. Thank you, sir.
Right.
Yes, we can see your screen, sir. You can make it full screen.
okay. So, yeah. Thanks, Sumit. And I also take this opportunity to thank the organizers for inviting me today. I will be speaking on the use of targeted chemotherapy in retinoblastoma management. We all know retinoblastoma is an aggressive tumor of childhood, though it is not a very big in terms of percentage. In India, the number of cases are fairly high. The incidence is around 1 in 15,000 live births. So it is actually a global problem, but the focus of this problem is the developing world. We see around 6,000 new cases per world. That's an estimate. Of these 6,000, almost up to 2,000 new cases occur in India. So you can realize that in India, retinoblastoma is a real big problem. The management of retinoblastoma has undergone a dramatic shift over the last 1 century. Prior to 1950s, enucleation was the only option. Post 1950 was the era of external beam radiotherapy. And from 1990 onwards, chemotherapy came in the forefront, and systemic chemotherapy was widely adopted all over the world. However, in the last 10 years, we have moved towards what is known as targeted chemotherapy, in which the two main therapies are intra-arterial chemotherapy and intravitreal chemotherapy. So advanced retinoblastoma actually means an advanced intraocular. It could also mean an orbital retinoblastoma. And in very rare cases, you have metastasis. Even metastatic retinoblastoma is one of the advanced presentation. For the purpose of this talk, we will be focusing only on the intraocular advanced retinoblastoma. And typically, these cases fall into groups D and E as per the international classification. And correlating to the TNM classification, it is CT2 and CT3. So here are two examples. On the left of your screen is a group B retinoblastoma where you see diffuse intravitreal seeds, which is causing the media to be very hazy. The disc is seen very hazily. Whereas on the right side is a group E retinoblastoma. This is an exophytic large tumor with secondary detachment. One should never lose sight of the treatment goals with these newer modalities, especially because you have to prioritize life over eyes and vision. So when we see a child with advanced unilateral retinoblastoma intraocular, the preferred treatment option earlier used to be enucleation, but nowadays we tend to offer intraarterial chemotherapy with or without intravitreal chemotherapy. However, for advanced bilateral retinoblastoma, we still continue giving systemic chemotherapy, and the protocol is called chemoreduction with focal therapy. It is often coupled with periocular chemotherapy if there are diffuse vitreous seeds. The drugs typically used for chemoreduction are vincristine, etoposide, and carboplatin. We give up to 6 cycles. Every month there is 1 cycle, and it's coupled with focal therapy. So with chemoreduction, you can see this large tumor has started to reduce with successful chemotherapy cycles, and now it's amenable to focal therapy. You can also see how the tumor has shrunk, and the tumor is withdrawn from the optic disc. Now, what is periocular chemotherapy? It's the injection of the chemotherapeutic agent into the deep posterior subtenon space. The drug earlier used to be carboplatin, but nowadays topotecan is a preferred drug because of a better safety profile. A paper by Dr. Honava's group has achieved almost 70% eye salvage in diffuse vitreous seeds with using periocular chemotherapy. However, this modality has slowly reduced in favor because of the advent of intravitreal chemotherapy. So targeted therapy in retinoblastoma, there are distinct advantages. The number one advantage is increased drug as to where you want it. So the drug availability at tumor location is very high, and this minimizes systemic side effects and toxicity. Overall, your treatment, the efficacy of your treatment improves, and you will be able to achieve your goals much easier. So what is intra-arterial chemotherapy? There are other names for this therapy. One of them is super selective intra-arterial chemotherapy or ophthalmic artery chemoinfusion or chemosurgery, as Professor Abramson from New York calls it. They all mean the same thing. So here is an animation, a video of the procedure. So this therapy actually was invented by the Japanese, and then Dr. Abramson group in New York repopularized it. Here you can see by a femoral axis, a guide wire with microcatheter is introduced. We go right up into the common carotid, and then we enter the internal carotid, and soon we inject at the ostium of the ophthalmic artery. The drug is injected in a pulsatile fashion to disrupt the laminar flow gradually over 30 minutes. Typically, 3 cycles of intra-arterial chemotherapy are given, and an EUA or an assessment is done after every cycle. You can see how the tumor responds, the tumor shrinks, and often you don't need to give any focal therapy because the intra-arterial therapy often takes care of the tumor by itself. So here is a fluoroscopic picture of what actually the procedure is done. It is done actually in the interventional radiology department by the interventional radiologist. And here you can see a nice choroidal blush. You have to make sure that you are into the ophthalmic artery system before injecting the drug. The agents typically used are melphalan, topotecan, and carboplatin, or you can use combination of the two. Of these 3 drugs, the most important drug remains melphalan. The tumor response after intra-arterial chemotherapy is quite dramatic. On the left of your screen is a large tumor and multiple small subretinal seeds. You can see a very good response. So after 3 sessions, typically you have excellent response with intra-arterial chemotherapy. Now, intravitreal chemotherapy is direct injection of the chemotherapeutic agent into the vitreous cavity. It was once forbidden, and now, since Professor Muniez's group published a landmark paper describing the technique, the safety enhanced technique has repopularized intravitreal chemotherapy. The indications remain vitreous seeds unresponsive to standard therapy, which could be systemic or intra-arterial chemotherapy, or recurrent vitreal seeds after previous therapy. The choice of drug for intravitreal chemotherapy remains either melphalan or topotecan. Now, melphalan is the most effective drug. However, it has a very tight therapeutic window. The dose needs to be around the 30 microgram mark. Lower doses typically give no effect at all, whereas if you are slightly higher doses above, especially 40 to 50 micrograms, you can land with a problem. Typically, you see a hypotony, uveitis, and sometimes phthisis bulbi. Typically, 3 or 6 injections are needed in a 7 to 10-day interval. The next drug, which is now recently popularized by Dr. Honauer's group especially, is topotecan. The dose is 30 micrograms given at 3-weekly interval, and it's preferred in Indian eyes where we see less uveitic response as compared to melphalan. So the safety enhanced technique, what we employ is we start with anterior side chamber paracentesis and reduce the eye pressure, and then with a very fine needle, 30 gauge needle or even finer if available, we go to the pars plana and inject right behind the crystalline lens. As you're escaping out, you have to freeze with cryo so as to sterilize any tumor cells which try to escape. Here you see a dramatic response of vitreous seeds. On the left is florid vitreous disease, which is taken care by 2 or 3 injections or sometimes a little more. So intravitreal chemotherapy has been proved to be safe and effective, and there have been no documented cases of extraocular spread using this technique. So this is a summary of which chemotherapy to use when. So if you are faced with a bilateral disease, you start with intravenous chemotherapy. And if you are faced with unilateral disease, then you can lean towards intra-arterial chemotherapy if you have the facility. For vitreous seeds, of course, we discussed, we have to fall back on intravitreal chemotherapy. Just a mention about this new therapy. It's called intracameral chemotherapy. It is done in select centers in the world. Now, this is reserved for, especially if it's the only eye and you have anterior segment seeding and somehow you have to try and save this eye. So this technique has been described in detail again by Professor Munier. And the details of this I'm not discussing because it is a little too complicated to discuss for today. However, it has been shown that intracameral chemotherapy has achieved globe salvage in some select few cases. So what are the takeaway points? Retinoblastoma management has changed dramatically over the last decade with the increasing use of IAC and intravitreal chemotherapy. IAC has eliminated almost 90% of enucleation performed just 10 years ago, whereas intravitreal chemotherapy has completely changed the management of vitreous seeds with a near 100% response. No compromise on patient survival has been found with the use of these two new therapies in advanced retinoblastoma disease. That's all. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, sir. That was really nice presentation covering almost all the aspects of chemotherapy. Sir, one small question before we go to the next talk. How early in the course of the treatment of RB in vitreous seeds, sir, you start on intravitreal chemotherapy? It is along with the first cycle, or you wait for 3 to 6 cycles and then you start with the intravitreal chemotherapy?
So you need to control the tumor first. The retinal disease has to be controlled first. So either if you're using systemic chemotherapy coupled with focal laser or cryo, you proceed with that. If you are proceeding with intra-arterial, because the source of the seeds has to be controlled. Once you control the source of the seeds, then if the vitreous seeds are still active, then you never give it upfront intravitreal. So it is never done initially. It is done as you give the other therapies and then you give intravitreal later on.
Okay. So we have Santosh Honavar sir also here. Sir started and popularized intravitreal topotecan in the country or in the world, you can say. Sir, any thoughts on the intravitreal chemotherapy? How early it is good for the patient to be started, or we should wait for a while?
Sumit, I would start only after the retinal tumors are nearly totally regressed. So after, if you're going for intravenous chemotherapy, 6 cycles of intravenous chemotherapy, or after optimal intra-arterial chemotherapy, then you start on intravitreal chemotherapy. Once the retinal tumors are nearly totally regressed, so that the risk of extraocular extension is minimized.
Okay, sir. So now we will go to our second presentation by Dr. Vikas Menon, sir. Sir will be talking on conjunctival tumor, what's new. Sir is trained at LVP hospital. He was working in Delhi CFS and now presently working in Pondicherry. And for him, I can say he has multiple peer-reviewed publications, and he is one of the coolest oncology and oculoplasty surgeons I know in India. Thank you so much, sir, for accepting the invitation and being here.
Thank you, Sumit, for that kind introduction. So I will begin with the topic assigned to me, that is conjunctival tumors and what is new in their management and about them. So what is new? I will be talking about what is new in terms of diagnostics, what is new in terms of medical management, and anything new in surgical management. I'll be covering these three aspects. So thanks to the efforts by Dr. Honavar emphasizing the role of anterior segment OCT in management and diagnosis of OSSN cases, we are now using more and more of this modality in diagnosing our patients, in prognosticating these patients, and in deciding about the management that we plan for these patients of OSSN. OSSN, as we all know, is the term used for ocular surface squamous neoplasia, which encompasses CIN, that is carcinoma in situ, dysplasias, and invasive squamous cell carcinomas. So clinically, most of the times, rather all the time, it is not easily possible to differentiate between the depth of invasion of a tumor, which is lying on the conjunctival surface. So we need something which can look at the tumor in a cross-sectional way, and that is where the OCT helps us. So the anterior segment OCT, when we use this as a tool to help us as an adjuvant thing in our diagnosis. So what we can see is a cross-section taken through the thickness of the tumor, and in this we see the tumor as a as a hyperreflective thickening of the epithelium. Now, this sometimes appears as an abrupt transition from the normal appearing epithelium to a hyperreflective epithelium. And you can see another case here. So if there is enough of keratinization, you even see this shadowing behind the lesion because of the presence of keratin on the surface, which enhances the hyperreflectivity. So OCT is helping us in diagnosing these tumors, number one, and we can also note whether there is some scleral or corneal invasion in any of the case, which helps us to decide the management plan for a patient, whether the patient would be fit for a medical management or a surgical management. As an example of that situation, I'm presenting this case where this patient presented with a biopsy which was done elsewhere. He had a limbal mass, and on OCT you could see that the hyperreflectivity is extending deep down into the superficial sclera. So this was a case where the sclera was breached and the tumor was actually extending into the superficial layers of the sclera. This patient would require a different form of management than a routine superficial type of conjunctival OSSN would. OCTs are also helping us in cases where there is some sort of dilemma between a benign or a malignant conjunctival pigmented lesion, as in this case where there is a diffuse sort of a pigmented lesion on the epibulbar surface you see on the conjunctiva. But if you perform an OCT through this lesion and you see these cysts, which sometimes are visible clinically, but if there are microcysts, it may not be always possible to pick them up on a slit lamp examination. And if you perform an OCT and you see these clear-cut cysts in the stroma of the conjunctiva, then most likely you are dealing with a benign nevus of the conjunctiva and not really a melanoma. Of course, sometimes a lesion can have both the components. On one side, there can be nevus which may progress to melanoma in another part. So it's important to have a look at the lesion in toto and not just on one side where you want to see. Another useful modality is UBM. UBM is particularly useful in situations like these where this patient presented with sort of a hypopyon in the anterior chamber. There was a history of a conjunctival mass excised elsewhere. So we did not have the histopathology report of what the mass was, but looking at the clinical picture, this looked like an intraocular invasion of an OSSN, and when UBM was performed, it showed marked ciliary body thickening and invasion of the ciliary body by the tumor. Second thing which is new is the new addition of AJCC classification for OSSNs, and this further details the OSSN classification, but there are drawbacks to this, as this basically is based on histopathology of the tumors, and nowadays, since most of the tumors are managed medically, this becomes a little problematic. So maybe the future generations of AJCC will be able to solve this problem. So topical therapy is the new thing where we mostly use interferon nowadays most commonly because of the least side effect profile. It's the most safe of all the drugs which are used as topical chemotherapy amongst mitomycin and 5-FU. Interferon seems to be the mildest and the safest. It has to be given for a prolonged period of time though. So these are a few examples where you see a gelatinous mass on the limbus and completely resolved after a couple of cycles of interferon topical therapy. Another limbal mass, OSSN, which resolves with just topical eye drops. Another patient with a larger mass, a papilliform mass on the limbus, again responded well to interferon injections and topical therapy. Another patient with an early stage OSSN responded to topical eye drops. So there are many such examples. One such situation is where it's especially useful is diffuse OSSN, where if you do surgery, it's likely to cause a lot of limbal stem cell loss and other forms of morbidity. So in such situations, if interferon is proving to be very helpful tool, in this patient, after a couple of injections of interferon, the tumor is completely regressed. But before you start prescribing interferon eye drop every patient of OSSN, I would recommend that anybody who's prescribing OSSN goes through this editorial of Dr. Honavar published in IJO, where he clearly describes the cases where it is indicated. And one must always remember that it is only indicated in superficial versions of OSSN, which are like CIN and dysplasias. But once the tumor becomes invasive, crosses the basement membrane, it becomes an invasive squamous cell carcinoma. That is not a situation where interferon should be given, but surgery should be the main option. So talking briefly about surgical technique, we know the specific protocol-based surgical technique involves wide excision of the tumors along with cryotherapy of the clear edges of conjunctiva, which works fairly well in well-defined tumors. But as the tumor size grows larger and larger, like in this situation, and if it's a tumor which is non-responsive to topical therapy and it's an invasive tumor, if you perform surgery, sometimes this happens, which is a consequence of extensive limbal stem cell loss. So how to avoid this? We tried in a couple of cases, limbal stem cell transplantation concurrently with the OSSN excision gave us good results. Another patient with diffuse kind of OSSN and with limbal stem cell transplant worked well. We published this technique, and motivated by this, we moved on to SLET along with the OSSN surgery as a primary modality along with the excision. So again, with SLET also we got a couple of good results. We published this also in Cornea. And so basically for diffuse lesions, if they are invasive squamous cell carcinomas, you may consider doing some sort of a limbal replacement at the time of primary surgery itself. The other modality that is important is plaque brachytherapy. Earlier, cases like these, which had some sort of scleral invasion, would be subjected to enucleation or exenteration. But now we have the option of plaque brachytherapy, where even if there is a scleral breach, partial thickness or superficial scleral breach, we can excise the lesion along with lamellar sclerectomy and place a plaque over the bed of the tumor so as to kill any remnant or any microscopic residue which may be there in the scleral layers. So plaque brachytherapy can be used as a secondary therapy or it can be used as a primary therapy. It's not enough time to go into details of plaque, but this is the case that I showed initially, which had a scleral penetration, and this patient was treated with excision of the tumor along with plaque brachytherapy. Plaque was performed by Dr. Onava, and this patient has been following up for many years now, absolutely disease free, and there's been no recurrence of the tumor. For tumors like these conjunctival melanomas, what is new is sentinel lymph node biopsy. Again, this is a technique whereby we try to locate the these lymphatic metastases at the earliest point and try to remove the involved set of lymph nodes which are affected by the tumor, so that we can avoid a more extensive radical neck dissection as well as distant metastasis in these patients. There are advantages and disadvantages and limitations of this technique as well. But as of now, it is recommended to be done in all such cases of melanoma where the thickness is more than 2 millimeters. So to summarize, what is new in management of surface tumors is using newer investigative modalities, using safer topical treatment options, and some changes in surgical technique by which we can improve our outcome results and the patient's prognosis. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, one small question. You said interferon alpha 2b as one of the modalities. Sir, have you, in your experience, seen failure of interferon alpha 2b in any of the cases? Not invasive, but just a diffuse OSSN or anything?
Yes, of course. There are some cases which, for no particular reason, don't respond to interferon at all. We really don't know why it happens so, but yes, there are some cases whereby you give interferon to these patients, and sometimes the cause can be an invasive squamous cell carcinoma component. A lesion of OSSN may have different components. In one part, it may be just a superficial CIN, and in another part, it may have an invasive component. So that could be one reason why it's not responding, and that you get to know only when you excise the lesion. But there are some cases which don't respond to.
So what do you do in such cases before surgery? Have you tried shifting to 5-fluorouracil or MMC in such cases? Or
I prefer to proceed with surgery if a patient is not responding to interferon, and after some time is given to the patient for this resolution, and if it still is not responding, then my preference is to go for surgery then. But yes, something else can be tried, like MMC F5 can be tried as an option.
okay, fine. So next will be Sir Santosh sir or Mahesh sir.
Either of us, no problem. Mahesh is ready when you speak, no problem.
Either way is fine, no issue.
Okay, fine. So we will, as it's given, we'll start with Dr. Santosh Onava sir then. And he will be talking on oncological principles for an oculoplastic surgeon. Santosh sir does not need any introduction. He is a role model for many of the ophthalmologists who want to do career in ophthalmology, and he has trained most of the ocular oncologists in India. Thank you so much, sir, for taking out a time from your busy OT schedule also today, and thank you so much for being here. Over
Thank
to
you,
you.
Sumit. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for having me part of MOS. I'll be talking about oncological principles for an oculoplasty surgeon. I will be leaving out intraocular tumors because Mahesh has a talk in detail on that same topic. So why should we have oncological principles applied to oculoplasty surgeries? That's because 30 to 50% of tumors of the ocular surface, eyelid, and orbit presenting to an oculoplasty surgeon are malignant, which implies that there is risk for life, eye, and vision salvage. Now, oncological principles for ocular surface tumors are that not to use topical therapy when not sure. Some of this because is already covered. And when you do surgery, you have to have both edge as well as base clearance. And if base clearance is logistically not possible because of scleral invasion or corneal stromal invasion, etc., then you have to perform histopathologically guided adjuvant therapy such as plaque brachytherapy. Screening for regional lymph node metastasis is important, and also the role of target therapy. So the first aspect is when not to offer topical therapy, specifically when the diagnosis is in doubt. Patient of this sort who come to you with red eye, which upfront looks like ocular surface squamous neoplasia, but when you evert the lid, you find that the lid margin is grossly thickened, posterior lid margin is rounded, lubomin gland orifices are all absent. This is a clear-cut case of vegetoid sebaceous gland carcinoma, obviously where chemotherapy will not work. The second is when you're not sure about the depth. OCT helps, but in the presence of keratin, as Vikas was pointing out, there is shadowing and you're not sure of the depth of this lesion. It may have involved a corneal stroma. So obviously, when you're not sure of the depth, again, topical therapy is not a good idea. Like this patient who had full thickness corneal stromal invasion as evidenced by imaging, which is not discernible on slit lamp, it would be inappropriate to start on topical therapy. Next is when you're not sure about the stage. In fact, this particular article on which many oncologists go by shows that it is effective in stage 3T3. But when you look at the AJCC classification and try to understand what exactly is stage T3, stage 3T3 is a tumor that invades adjacent structures excluding orbit. That means that it invades cornea, intraocular structures, fornical conjunctiva, palpebral conjunctiva, tarsal conjunctiva, etc. Obviously, topical therapy would not work in these situations. So just going by the gross staging and applying it to our cases is not appropriate. You have to individualize treatment. Of course, superficial tumors respond very well, but when there is invasion, it is not appropriate at all to use topical therapy. Example is this patient where somebody else started on topical therapy expecting it to resolve, but on the contrary, within 3 weeks, it has showed increase in size. This was a previously excised case, I believe, where there was recurrence. So definitely not to go by the conclusion of the paper, read it in detail, and then apply it to your cases. When we perform surgery, it is expected that we perform excision with 4 millimeter clinically clear tumor-free margins, which is guided by Rose Bengal staining. And for the corneal epithelial component, we perform alcohol-assisted keratoepitheliectomy and cryotherapy to the resection edge, which gives you additional advantage of about 4 millimeter. That is about the edge. Edge is quite clear and you're able to control the edge in most of the situations. But controlling the base requires an understanding of how deep the tumor is already before you start excising, and OCT comes to help. Like this patient has tumor restricted only to the conjunctiva, that bubbly layer is the Tenon's layer. So plane of dissection can be episcleral here, very straightforward. But if a patient has tumor that is adherent to sclera, or if there is episcleral fixity, then you are mandated that you evaluate further by imaging to exclude scleral or anterior segment extension. And in such situation, you have to perform plaque brachytherapy, otherwise offer extended enucleation as an alternative to patient. Plaque works very well in about 90% of patients when the sclera or if there is limited anterior segment involvement. Then adjuvant therapy is never to be guided by guess.
just after excising a tumor, you need not provide topical therapy, or in certain situations withhold it. There are very clear guidelines as to when to perform adjuvant therapy. If the resection edge is positive and with only dysplasia or carcinoma in situ, then observation is accepted if cryotherapy, edge cryotherapy has been performed. If it's not been performed, then topical immuno or chemotherapy is acceptable. If the resection edge is positive and the pathologist tells you that it is invasive squamous cell carcinoma at the resection edge, at least medico-legally you are bound to re-excise, because we know that invasive squamous cell carcinoma does not respond to topical therapy. If resection base is positive and if the pathologist is able to pinpoint the claw cover of base involvement, if it's 1 or 2 claw cover, then you can do transconjunctival cryotherapy. If resection base is positive and the pathologist is not able to identify the exact location of the base positivity, or if it's diffuse, then you can do plaque brachytherapy. If a patient is prone to recurrence, such as xeroderma pigmentosum or HIV positive individuals, then immunomodulation with once a day dose of interferon is the treatment of choice. Head PET scan or sentinel biopsy for larger tumors are important, because you can diagnose regional lymph node metastasis quite early on. About target therapy, for at least for melanoma, target therapy is available for each mutational spectrum. There are specific target agents which has already been worked on. There are reports that are appearing in the literature about the use of topical therapy for regional lymph node metastasis. Concurrently, ocular surface tumors also seem to have shown resolution, as you see in this particular case report. And we had an experience of a patient where there was regional lymph node metastasis, and concurrently the patient also had recurrences in the ocular surface. This was a melanoma. After 3 months of treatment with Leumamab, you can find that ocular surface lesions have also regressed remarkably. So there is a role for using these therapeutic modalities for extensive lesions. And at least in patients who have a high risk for metastasis or have early metastasis, you can use target therapy if you have worked out the mutational spectrum, which means that genetic testing is become practically applicable in patients with conjunctival melanoma at least. For eyelid tumors, the oncological principles are intraoperative margin control. In fact, frozen section intraoperative margin control is the gold standard, and which we must try to apply in every patient. If a frozen section is not available, then you can excise it, send for an expedited fixed sections, and based on that reconstruct, and not be in a hurry to reconstruct, because eyelid can be reconstructed even after 24 or 48 hours. There is absolutely no problem as long as you can protect the cornea. In sebaceous gland carcinoma specifically, exclude intraepithelial tumor by doing a MAP biopsy. And in patients who have an advanced tumor, multimodal treatment. Again, screen for regional lymph node metastasis, and target therapy is also applicable. Specifically, when you are operating on a sebaceous gland carcinoma, you have to take clinically clear margins, both from the skin side as well as from the conjunctival side. You can see here that the skin component seems smaller, whereas the conjunctival component is much larger. So you have to take appropriate margins on both the sides and send the margins on a filter paper marked clearly with orientation for the pathologist to interpret. And this is how you take a MAP biopsy: 16 to 17 samples taken from the perilimbal conjunctiva, pharyngeal and palpebral conjunctiva, lateral canthus, and the plica semilunaris. These are numbered and sent to the pathologist. For larger or advanced tumors of this sort, sebaceous gland carcinoma, we do neoadjuvant chemotherapy. You can see remarkable reduction in the size of the lesion with each cycle of chemotherapy. Now, what is left is definitely amenable to excision. This was a young individual with a very rare form of sebaceous gland carcinoma involving the lacrimal sac. He wanted to save his eye, which had 6/6 and 6 vision, where neoadjuvant chemotherapy was provided to reduce the size of the lesion, followed by dacrocystectomy, radiation, and adjuvant chemotherapy, and the patient is able to save his eye and vision. About basal cell carcinoma, we have a nice target therapy in the form of vismodegib, sonidegib are the drugs that are used for extensive syndromic basal cell carcinoma. Similarly, it can be used for orbital extension as well. For squamous cell carcinoma, we have erlotinib, which is freely available in India, which is epidermal growth factor receptor inhibitor. It at most stabilizes the lesion after making it smaller. This lesion can be made smaller
And obviously the patient has benefited because his pupil is exposed. Now he is able to see with both eyes. This is for patients who are inoperable because of their systemic conditions, etc. Coming to orbital tumors, complete excision of a well-circumscribed orbital tumor where functional deficit is unlikely. This is the treatment of choice, irrespective of whether you think it is benign or malignant on radiological evaluation and on your clinical evaluation. If it is well circumscribed and the excision is unlikely to have functional deficits such as loss of vision or diplopia, then you're bound to completely excise it, not to leave a remnant behind. Especially this is true in pleomorphic adenoma, etc., where leaving a remnant behind will be more damaging to the patient. When you plan incisional biopsy or safe debulking, with or without intraoperative diagnosis, it is indicated for infiltrative tumors, excising which is likely to cause functional deficit. So if you feel that it is a malignant tumor, you can always do an intraoperative diagnosis either by frozen section or squash and imprint. And if it is a malignant lesion, you can, having explained to the patient preoperatively, go ahead with complete excision, irrespective of it whether it causes functional deficit or not. But if it is treated, amenable for treatment with chemotherapy and radiation, you can just get away with a safe debulking or an incisional biopsy. So it has to be histopathology guided, and even adjuvant therapy is histopathology guided. And of course, there's role for multimodal biopsy. Now, in incisional biopsy, direct approach is warranted, which means that if the lesion is in the supratemporal orbit, for example, you don't have to do a lid crease incision and get there and seed the entire plane with the tumor. That happens. And you also remember to do multi-level biopsy and if required, get an intraoperative diagnosis. This is an example of a patient with adenoid cystic carcinoma of the lacrimal gland where the surgeon has done a biopsy with a lid crease approach. Patient, of course, recurred after a few years and the entire subcutaneous area was studded with nodules of adenoid cystic carcinoma. Apart from it having recurred in the temporal fossa, you can also note that their bone cut has been performed. So bone cut is contraindicated, relatively contraindicated in adenoid cystic carcinoma, and also a remote incision. If you are suspecting adenoid cystic carcinoma, it is always good to do a direct approach right on top of the tumor so that that area can be nicely included in the field of radiation. If you do a lid crease approach, then the question of doing good dosimetry and also protecting the cornea during radiation becomes very controversial. It becomes difficult. The second aspect is about multi-layered biopsy. 8 to 20% of orbital biopsies result in non-specific or misleading diagnosis. This is an example of a child with rhabdomyosarcoma, where I'll just show you example of, because we do a biopsy right up to the epicenter of the lesion, superficial, mid, deep, and deep. So I have an access to superficial biopsy, which shows only inflammation and fibrosis. So if suppose we were to do biopsy only superficially, then you would misinterpret this condition as inflammation, whereas the deep biopsy showed rhabdomyosarcoma. So multi-level biopsy, superficial, intermediate, deep, passing beyond the epicenter, depth having been estimated by CT scan or MRI, and appropriate special stains, PCR-based diagnosis, and frozen section or imprint squash intraoperative diagnosis are critical if you're planning incisional biopsy. Pathology, like if this well-circumscribed lesion, even if it's well-circumscribed, completely excised, as you can see, if it is SFT, then adjuvant radiation may be indicated in the area where the tumor is located because SFTs tend to recur. One more example of a patient where there was a supranasal SFT, we have completely excised just because it is SFT and has a high mitotic index, adjuvant radiation would be indicated. In multimodal treatment, we always do a biopsy to confirm the diagnosis, then chemoreduce it, then excise the tumor or debulk it, then give adjuvant radiation and further chemotherapy. That's because we have to control not just the tumor locally, but also systemically. Micrometastasis cannot be taken care of by any other measure except adjuvant chemotherapy. So this is an example of an adenoid cystic carcinoma of the lacrimal gland where it has been chemoreduced, after which it has been excised and blocked. Then further adjuvant radiation has been given, followed by adjuvant chemotherapy. This increases the chance of success life salvage to about 90 to 95%. One more similar example just to show you that we don't have to meddle with the bone so much. this patient has bone involvement, but we haven't done anything to the bone. We have just followed the multimodal treatment protocol and bone nicely remodels. In fact, excising the bone will make it extraorbital. This has provided much better success than conventional treatment. So in conclusion, I would say that adherence to oncological principles helps optimize life, eye, and vision salvage in tumors of the ocular surface, eyelid, and orbit. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. That was really extensive and wonderful talk. It covers almost all the principles of ocular oncology. Thanks a lot, sir. And we will move on to our last talk in the session by Dr. Mahesh Shanmuganan, sir, on the management of intraocular tumors. Mahesh Shanmuganan, sir, doesn't need any introduction. He is an authority in intraocular tumors and especially the surgical aspect of it. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Sumit, for the kind introduction, and thanks to Dr. Ragini and Dr. Santosh for including me in this session, and thanks to MOS office bearers as well. So let's look at the overview of management of intraocular tumors in the next few minutes. We'll start with the uveal melanoma, which is the commonest primary intraocular tumor. So melanoma can involve the iris, ciliary body, as well as the choroid. So let's look at these lesions which are anteriorly placed, the iris melanoma or ciliary body melanoma. Here we have a very small ciliary body melanoma growing to the root of the iris. These lesions can be excised, particularly lesions up to 1/3 of the ciliary body can be resected. So here we see one such example of a patient. So because this part of the capsule will not have the support, we decided to do a cataract surgery and place an endocapsular ring. This is a ciliary body tumor growing to the root of the iris. Up to 1/3 of the ciliary body can be resected without the risk of hypotony subsequently. And we have done a partial thickness scleral flap. And instead of doing a sectoral iridectomy, we decided to do a peripheral iridectomy. 3 mm of the peripheral iris around the tumor is resected with intraocular scissors. And all these surgeries are usually done at the general anesthesia with hypotensive anesthesia to decrease the risk of disastrous expulsive hemorrhage occurring during the surgery. So we enter the anterior chamber, make an incision into the eye, and the whole lesion, the iris part, the inner layer of the sclera, and the tumor is removed, and an open sky vitrectomy is performed, and the scleral flap is closed. So this surgery can be done for anterior placed tumors. What about choroidal melanoma? A small choroidal melanoma, one of the techniques described now is to do a vitrectomy and do a biopsy and do endolaser. This is one such patient who had a vitreous hemorrhage as well. So we have done a vitrectomy and do a biopsy, a fine needle aspiration biopsy intraoperatively, and then do laser photocoagulation around the biopsy site as well as deep laser for the tumor itself. The need for biopsy is not to confirm the diagnosis, which can be most often done clinically, but in addition to confirming the diagnosis, the key is to do the genetic analysis of the tumor. Because genetic analysis of the melanoma tells us what kind of a class of tumor it is, whether it's a class 1 or class 2 tumors. Class 1 tumors are the ones with a very good prognosis, and class 2 tumors which may have a monosomy 3 or chromosome 8 alteration within the tumor have a very high risk of metastasis. In case it is class 2 tumor, it is subsequently treated with brachytherapy. And this is what is a treatment for medium-sized melanoma as well. Brachytherapy, episcleral brachytherapy is a treatment for medium-sized melanoma. Enucleation or brachytherapy, the survival has been shown to be the same, but brachytherapy allows us to save the eye with some vision in these patients. Despite the brachytherapy, here we see regression of the tumor. Despite the brachytherapy, 50% of the patients lose vision over time. This is because of radiation retinopathy. The one such patient who had a uveal melanoma, choroidal melanoma, which was treated with brachytherapy and continued to have radiation-induced complications. This patient was treated with repeated anti-VEGF agents, steroids, and sectoral laser photocoagulation, despite which the macular edema turned resistant, and the patient kind of had a toxic tumor syndrome. In such situations, one of the options is to resect the tumor, which has already been treated with brachytherapy. So here we made a retinal flap, folded it over, and the tumor is being removed with endoresection. And the tumor is extending close to the macula, so creating a peripheral retinal flap allowed us to access the macular part of the tumor without extending the retinectomy close to the macula. So this is a bad sclera. The tumor is shaved off from the sclera. And the retinal flap, we kept it in place by using perfluorocarbon liquid so that it will allow us to access. So this is a perfluorocarbon which is being injected over the folded retinal flap, and the rest of the tumor is being removed. And subsequent to this, we replaced the retinal flap and removed the internal limiting membrane as well to decrease the risk of subsequent macular edema, and laser photocoagulation was done to the margins of the retinectomy. And the cell residues which could not be peeled off from the sclera are being treated with laser photocoagulation, and a direct perfluorocarbon and silicon oil exchange is done. This is the immediate postoperative appearance. You can see the macula here and an attached retina. And this is one such patient who underwent endoresection about 8 years back for the same problem. And you can see the macula is perfectly all right, and the patient continues to enjoy good vision. So melanoma resection, survival in melanoma is as good as brachytherapy. The advantage is 3 times eye with vision. It's always better to combine resection and brachytherapy for better results. Except for anteriorly placed localized lesions, we can directly resect them. Endoresection may salvage eyes from toxic tumor syndrome. Complications, the dreaded complication is extraocular dissemination. So the case selection is particularly important, and the meticulous surgery is very, very important. Retinal detachment, intraocular hemorrhage, and expulsive hemorrhage are vitreoretinal complications which may need subsequent treatment in some of these patients. Larger melanomas are better enucleated. One of the options is proton beam radiation, which is available in India and Chennai, but it's particularly expensive. Moving on to vascular tumors, retinal hemangiomas can be by themselves, can occur by like as a part of a von Hippel-Lindau syndrome, or a single tumor can also be there. So this is one such patient where you can see the VHL syndrome with multiple lesions. Smaller angiomas are directly treated with photocoagulation. Larger tumors are treated with the feeder vessel technique, and peripheral tumors are treated with double freeze-thaw, and this is the response to the treatment. Much larger tumors are difficult to treat with either of these and result in severe scarring. I treat them with brachytherapy. I can see post-brachytherapy regression of the peripheral hemangioblastomas. And retinal hemangioblastomas can have vitreoretinal complications such as this. Attraction retinal detachment can happen, in which case a vitreoretinal surgery would be required. So here the patient has a traction macular detachment with exudation. And a very careful vitrectomy and removal of the traction is what is to be done without creating any retinal breaks, because we don't want to convert a traction retinal detachment into a regmentous retinal detachment. Very careful limited dissection of the traction bands is also being done. And subsequent to this, you will see that the traction detachment is resolved and the macula has almost come back to normal place, and the tumor is also regressed. The exudation is also a hallmark of the vascular tumors of the retina and choroid, and this is one such patient with a peripapillary angioma. So because the treatment was not possible because of the presence of detachment, we drained the exudative retinal detachment transcranially using a needle drainage technique. So a vitrectomy is not done, but a transcranial drainage of the subretinal fluid is done to allow the retina to reattach. And the tumor in this situation was treated with laser photocoagulation because the patient had very poor vision. Otherwise, a peripapillary hemangioblastoma is treated with photodynamic therapy. And similarly, the retinal hemangioblastomas can result in retinal detachment. This is one such patient who had a macular hole as well as a peripheral hemangioblastoma. It's a macular hole through which the subretinal fluid is drained. And usually I don't like to resect the peripheral angiomas because they result in severe scarring and subsequent phthisis. I usually treat them and support them with the buccal, but this patient was different. So for the macular hole was treated with ILM peeling. And subsequently, this was supported to the buccal and the buccal outside, but the scarring was so significant that the retina wouldn't relax to reattach the retina. So the tumor with the contracted retina was removed. This is a phakic patient, so the phakic base excision and removal of the tumor is being done. So one of the seldom situations where I have done the excision of the tumor, otherwise it doesn't work too well. And subsequently, you can see the retinectomy falling on the buccal and laser photocoagulation and reattachment of the retina with silicon oil is what is done. And exudative detachment is something which can happen in choroidal hemangiomas, particularly in the Sturge-Weber syndrome. This is one such patient with the Sturge-Weber syndrome and retina right behind the lens. And here we are doing a transconjunctival drainage, injection in one hand and drainage transconjunctivally in the other hand. And once the retina is reattached, the hemangioma is treated. Choroidal hemangioma is usually treated with photodynamic therapy. And larger tumors with surface pigmentation like this, which is not possibly amenable to photodynamic therapy, can be treated with plaque brachytherapy as well. Vascular tumors of the retina and choroid, definitely we need to rule out phacomatoses by doing systemic investigations and neurological imaging. Let's look at another series of patients. There's a 25-year-old lady with multiple serous detachments in both eyes and headache, was suspected to have VKH. A 70-year-old gentleman with a scleritis and a serous choroidal detachment and inferior exudative retinal detachment. Another lady with a mass lesion in one of the posterior pole with associated detachment and subretinal deposits. And here's another lady who had this lesion grow right in front of her eyes, cause combined central retinal artery and vein occlusion. What is common to all this is these are atypical presentation of intraocular metastasis. Classic metastasis presents like bilateral, multifocal, placoid, cream-colored lesions with disproportionate retinal detachment. But metastasis can present like this as well. The key is to look for disproportionately less inflammatory signs and disproportionately more exudative retinal detachment. Treatment of metastasis is the same as that of the primary treatment. So this patient had carcinoma of breast treated with chemotherapy, resulting in regression of the metastatic lesions in the choroid. This lady had had a bilateral mastectomy earlier and presented with the lesion at the optic disc, which caused the central retinal artery and vein occlusion, which did not respond to systemic chemotherapy, and ultimately we treated this patient with intravitreal chemotherapy and anti-VEGF agents. This gentleman had a cholangiocarcinoma, and the eye was treated with radiation, following which the lesion regressed. Yet another tumor which we come across often is the primary vitreoretinal lymphoma, and it can present as uveitis, and because of this, the diagnosis delayed by more than a year in many of these patients. So these are patients who present with classically recalcitrant uveitis, have gone to multiple specialists, and still come back with recurrence of the disease. The diagnosis is by doing a diagnostic vitrectomy. If you were to do a diagnostic vitrectomy, you have to stop the steroids 2 weeks before and use a low-cut vitreous biopsy. And this is one such patient who had bilateral vitreous infiltrates and also a neurological lesion. And this is the vitreous biopsy which is being done. And this patient actually presented with something like a frosted branch angiitis. And the vitreous specimen is sent for cytology, and which does confirm the diagnosis of primary intraocular lymphoma. How do you treat it? If it is only ocular involvement, because primary intraocular lymphoma very often has CNS involvement or will go on to develop CNS involvement. So when we see the patient with only intraocular disease, if it is unilateral, we can treat them with only intravitreal chemotherapy. If it is bilateral, intravitreal and systemic chemotherapy is what is required. And these are patients who may subsequently go on to develop CNS disease. So we need to image them once in 3 monthly for the next 2 years. Ocular disease plus CNS disease intravitreal is what we start off with, and along with systemic chemotherapy. Vitrectomy is also therapeutic because it clears the media and debulks the vitreous as well. The chemotherapeutic agents used for primary intraocular lymphoma are intravitreal methotrexate and rituximab. And this is one such example where we treated the patient with intravitreal drugs and the resolution of the lymphoma lesions. Radiation is also an option if there is an ocular recurrence or if the CNS disease is also there and the CNS disease is to be treated with radiation, then the eye can also be involved in the radiation field. Moving on to a couple of very rare situations. There is a young gentleman with a lesion which was growing in the episcleral, in the suprachoroidal space, and this was causing a mass effect, but the patient did not have any vision problems, but the lesion was growing. And an ultrasound showed the lesion was the suprachoroidal supraciliary space. So a biopsy showed that it was a schwannoma arising from the choroid, suprachoroidal space. And because it was the suprachoroidal space, we decided to remove that lesion. And this was the area where an incisional biopsy was done initially to diagnose the lesion. A full thickness hinged scleral flap is done. And this is the mass lesion which is sitting on the surface of the uvea. You can see the uvea nicely here, and very careful dissection was done from the overlying sclera and from the underlying uveal tissue. Fortunately, we did not perforate the uveal tissue, and an endocrine probe was used to hold on to the tumor and resect it. And the scleral flap is closed. And this was the site of the incisional biopsy, which opened up, and some cell rests were there around it, which was also removed, and the lesion was closed. This is the postoperative appearance, and the lesion did not occur again. Similar resections can be done for localized case of ciliary body medullary epithelioma, which is arising in the ciliary body, as well as solitary melanocytomas can also be resected. And one last part about like Dr. Nandan had covered the retinoblastoma beautifully, and this is one extensive. It is a area where we are like venturing very, very carefully. There's a patient with a retinal detachment in the only eye of the child with retinoblastoma, and the greenish hue you see here is the intraocular chemotherapeutic agent which is placed in the infusion fluid, and subconjunctival chemotherapeutic agent is also being done. So in very select situations where it's a only eye of the child, we do go ahead with the vitrectomy to try salvaging that eye at least. Sorry about that. So we need to take special precautions to minimize the you take special precautions to decrease the risk of extraocular spillage of the cells using valve cannula, stopping the infusion when the instruments go in and out of the eye. And chemotherapeutic agents are placed in the infusion and also at the end of the surgery. And the vitrectomy specimen is sent for cytology to see if the tumor is still active or not. Cryo to the ports are being done. Subconjunctival chemotherapeutic agents are used. And all this is done under cover of systemic chemotherapy or external beam radiation. And subsequently, repeated intravitreal chemotherapy may also be required. To summarize, melanoma, anteriorly localized tumors, we can resect them. Even coronal melanoma, biopsy and laser for smaller tumors, brachytherapy for medium-sized tumors, and larger tumors are enucleated. Vascular tumors, laser, cryotherapy, PDT are the mainstay of treatment. Brachytherapy in advanced lesions can be done. Vitrectomy techniques for complications may be required, and lymphoma biopsy followed by intravitreal plus or minus systemic chemotherapy, and in select situations, external beam radiation is what is required. Metastasis treatment is that of the primary tumor. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. That was really an amazing presentation as always. Sir, a few questions for you. Sir, as you showed the case of ciliary body melanoma and of the resection done, do you recommend any adjuvant radiation in that cases post-surgery?
If it is a very small lesion and we are able to get 3 mm clearance all around, it is not required. If it is not, then probably you can treat it with subsequent brachytherapy as well.
Okay. Sir, any factors for choosing a surgical treatment or a plaque brachytherapy for such small tumors, or why it is more preferable, or in which cases you prefer doing a surgery for the ciliary body tumors instead of a plaque brachytherapy?
As I mentioned, if the area of resection will also be less than one third of the ciliary body to be resected, then we can go ahead with the resection. Because plaque brachytherapy anteriorly, what happens, it can result in complications of a cataract as well as ciliary body. Radiation can have its own complications. So in those situations where it is completely a localized lesion, better to resect rather than do a brachytherapy.
Okay. And sir, what is your preferred treatment for optic nerve head hemangioblastomas with SRF?
If we make the patient sit down and the tumor is visible, and it's possible to localize the tumor, visualize the whole tumor on slit lamp for doing a photodynamic therapy, we can go ahead directly with the photodynamic therapy. If there is overlying fluid which would not allow us to do a photodynamic therapy, then we can drain, reattach the retina, and then treat with photodynamic therapy.
Okay, sir. One question for Santosh sir. Santosh sir, you're there?
Yeah, good.
Sir, in cases you said that in multimodal treatment, you should always go ahead with the incision biopsy. But in some of the cases, as you say, we should avoid a direct biopsy to for avoid the seeding of the tumor, because it becomes the site of recurrence in the later stages. So, sir, what are the telltale signs that these are the harmful things to go ahead with the direct biopsy, and it can cause a further recurrence or difficulty in the management by the oncologist also?
What I said was that you should do direct biopsy. You should never do a flap or a remote incision, because you'll be seeding the tumor in the subcutaneous plane, in the suborbicularis plane. That's what I said. If a tumor is well circumscribed, even if it is adenoid cystic carcinoma, for example, if a tumor is well circumscribed, if it is not adherent to, say, lateral rectus or infiltrating it, or SRLPS complex and infiltrating it, it is best to completely excise it and then continue with multimodal treatment. Excision is not the end of treatment, it is just the beginning. But if a tumor is infiltrative and completely excising it would cause functional problems to the patient, then it is best to chemo-reduce it and then do a safe excision.
Okay. And sir, sometimes we do see orbital tumors involving the muscle. Sometimes it's like a fusiform thickening of the muscle. That's what it appears on the even on the scans. And the muscle already has become dysfunctional, and the mass is involving the mid-orbit till the posterior orbit. And we need to biopsy such a lesion. So in this cases, doing a surgical resection and compromising the muscle is advisable, or you just try to take an incision biopsy as minimum as possible with the minimal invasive.
Putting your radiology and clinical examination together, if you're more in favor of a malignant lesion, then you do an incisional biopsy from a safe zone and get an intraoperative diagnosis. Depending on the intraoperative diagnosis, for example, if it's a round cell tumor, then you know that it is treatable by chemotherapy and radiation, then incisional biopsy is just good enough. Otherwise, if it's a sarcoma, you know that sarcoma surgical treatment is the treatment of choice, radiation is only adjuvant, then you would go ahead and excise it completely, having counseled the patient preoperatively that you will take an intraoperative decision. So depending on what it is, you have to proceed further.
Okay. Sir, Mahesh sir, in cases of vitreoretinal lymphoma, sometimes we do see a very focal peripheral retinal lesions are there, and vitreous is not that much involved. And the retinal biopsy is indicated in such cases. So what precautions to be taken, because it can cause a retinal tear and further complications in a good seeing eye of the patients. So how do you recommend some surgical precautions to be taken in such cases?
Yeah, if it is really necessary to go ahead, we need to do a biopsy. What we can do is to induce the posterior vitreous detachment, then do laser photocoagulation around the area where we are going to do the biopsy. And using a bimanual technique with the chandelier, we can hold the lesion, hold the tissue in one hand and cut with the scissors and very carefully remove it. And if it is superior, actually, there is no need to have a silicone oil tamponade in many of these patients because we're dealing with the attached retina in the rest of the areas. So we can leave it with air that should take care of it. So it doesn't result in a subsequent retinal detachment or anything like that if it is done carefully. And it's usually not very peripheral. Usually the lesions are a little bit more posterior. So once the vitreous is removed off from the area of involvement, it's safe to go ahead with the biopsy and just do laser just before it and leave it with that. That should be adequate.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you everyone for being here. I think that brings to the end of the session. And thank you all for your time. Thank you all the listeners, and thank you all the speakers for being here. And I thank everyone, technical team, Santosh sir, Mahesh sir, Vikas sir, and Nandan sir on behalf of MOSCON for being here. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you, Sumit. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sumit.
Bye.